You know, if there's like Q&A on every. Check 1, 2, 3. Everybody will be starting in a few moments. Some
Like I literally have a YSL mascara, but I don't.
One sec, let me mute myself. How can I tell about you?
virtual attendees, please mute your mics until you're ready to speak.
and really what kind of days or whatever she's thinking. It would be nice to do it during the summer. We could go down here during a weekday type thing. These days, you know. Because I know on Mondays and Tuesdays, no, I think it's Sundays and Mondays, she stay with her mother and we don't have to interfere with her schedule.
I think that.
All virtual attendees, make sure you keep your mics muted, please. Thank you.
We're going to get started in a few minutes. So if everybody can move up, take a seat at the tables if they're available. All right? All right, we're going to get started now. I'm Mark Strohopper, if you don't know who I am, and I'm the Higher Ed Program Coordinator for FEMA Region 2. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the FEMA Higher Ed Roundtable. First thing I'd like to do is to thank Kent University for hosting the event in this great facility. Special thanks to Jerome Hatfield for putting this together, along with the help of Alyssa and Will with the IT. They put a lot of time and effort into hosting this event. There are a lot of moving pieces putting these events together, and they've done a fantastic job. The roundtable itself is a quarterly series that we started in November of 2022. The initial topic being climate adaptation, and then we did the future of emergency management, followed by critical infrastructure, and then resilience and hubs, and then we did extreme weather. The topic for this roundtable is campus safety. The goal of these roundtables is to bring together the academics, the private sector, state and local partners, as well as the practitioners, so that all parties can work together. And as you will see, we have an extremely qualified group of participants, both in person here today and virtually with us. With that said, let's just go around the table. Let's just go around the tables and briefly introduce.
Supervisor Intelligence Analyst at the FBI Newark Field Office.
My name's Katie Lord. I am a supervisory domestic security strategist with the National Threat Assessment Center at the Secret Service.
Mark Leschnauer, I'm an assistant special agent in charge, Newark Field Office, Secret Service.
My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm an intelligence analyst, New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness.
Morning, my name is Bob DeGenova. I'm the Deputy Chief of Police at Stevens Institute of Technology, and I'm the president of New Jersey CUPSA.
Thank you. Okay, I'd now like to introduce Dr. Lamont Repollet, who's the president of Kane University, for the opening remarks. Doctor, it's all you.
Good morning, everyone. Esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends. It's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to Kane University for the FEMA Higher Education Roundtable focused on a subject of paramount importance to us all, campus safety. As we gather here today, we are reminded of the critical role that safety and security play in educational environments across New Jersey and beyond. The safety of our campuses is a fundamental right for our students, faculty, and staff, and the highest priority for all of us. I'm grateful for the distinguished experts in the field of safety and emergency management joining us today. Their expertise and insight will enlighten us and help make our campuses safer to help students reach their highest potential. We all know that keeping our campuses safe is complicated and multifaceted, but the proactive and collaborative approach we embrace today is where we find solutions and best practices to all. Kane University, New Jersey Urban Research University, stands at the forefront of addressing urban and campus safety issues. We are committed to fostering a culture of preparedness, resilience, and inclusivity, ensuring that our community is equipped to respond to and recover from any challenges that may arise. As we embark on today's sessions, I encourage you to engage openly, share your experiences, and collaborate on innovative solutions that will not only benefit our individual campuses, but also contribute to the broader narrative of campus safety across the country. At Kane, we say Cougars climb higher. Today, we'll climb higher on this security, on this critical, important issue. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise and knowledge. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Robert DeGenova, who's the president of NJ CUPSA.
Just give him a minute to get the PowerPoint up. So thank you for inviting me to be here, Mark. So Bob DeGenova. My prior career before coming to higher education, I retired from the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office and transitioned into higher ed. And I say that because one of the advantages of New Jersey CUPSA is that there's many officers that do the same, in addition to those who spend their career in higher education. So we've been around for 50 years and represent public safety and the law enforcement partners throughout the state of New Jersey. The biggest benefit that we feel from our CUPS organization, we have our monthly meetings. We start out in September, we go through the end of May, and it's the relationships that you build for higher education. For those that are just coming into it, you realize that there's a big learning curve, and that's something that we really try to talk about best practices, policies that we can share. A benefit of the membership is we have a listserv that whether you go to the meetings or not, that listserv is an opportunity to exchange information, to ask questions. And when you look at our organization of over 1,800 people, there's 40 universities and colleges that represent New Jersey CUPSA. Our membership goes beyond just the state of New Jersey. We take members from government partners, corporate partners, as well as colleges and universities from outside of the state of New Jersey as well. Our website, we have a new website that's up and running. You can find out our membership information on there for any folks that are out there that are interested in being part of CUPSA. We have our an annual conference every year that this year is April 16th to the 18th in Atlantic City. And we have a one-day feature that's, I'll say more law enforcement oriented, but also for the higher ed folks. And then the next day and a half is more the higher ed aspect and some of the things to know in higher ed. I said we have a pretty vibrant agenda with the professionals that represent both law enforcement and higher ed that are taking part in that conference. And I encourage anybody who's interested to, again, on our website, we have a brochure there. We put the information out through various social media networks as well. And that's pretty much it as far as New Jersey CUPSA. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's about the partnerships. You know, with our meetings, we have the FBI, the state police, Homeland Security that are part of our organization that are there. Hopefully we'll get FEMA on board as well. And it's just to share information. So we're best prepared to keep the students in our state and the surrounding states safe, to know the best practices, to know have the best policies that we can collaborate with, and that's for the safety of our students. So so that's who we are and what we do, and I appreciate the time here. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center presentation with enhancing school safety using a threat assessment model with Katie Lord.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, good. My name is Katie Lord, and I am a supervisory domestic security strategist with the National Threat Assessment Center at the Secret Service. That's a mouthful. Basically, I am in charge of our regional representatives. So a few years ago, NTAC decided to put some representatives in the field so that we were able to better facilitate access to the research and the experience that we have, the expertise in the field of targeted violence prevention. So I'm gonna talk to you today about our model, about our research, and even share some of those resources you can walk away with today. I do have some QR codes up here for the publications that we have if you want to come up and just hit that. I will also have a QR code on the screen at the very end that you can go to our website and have access to everything. So without further ado, are the slides working? Okay. All right. So just a little bit about who I am. I've been with the Secret Service for about 20 years. My experience is in doing, I guess, just supporting the field and their investigations, financial crime background, PI cases. I worked in our Protective Intelligence Division for a number of years. So that is a place in the Secret Service where we do behavioral threat assessment. When I talk about the model that we offer all of you, it is the actual model that we use in our agency. We've been doing this for over 25 years. It works. And so we want to share it with all of you. I also want to emphasize that the model that we offer is also based in the research that we do in our agency in the National Threat Assessment Center. We are embedded. We look at past incidents of violence that have occurred, targeted violence, and we try to learn from that. It is a very proactive, preventative model. So this is, we look at things way before, and we want to intervene way before somebody thinks that violence is an option, way before they have a weapon in their hand to try to harm themselves or someone else. So keep that in the back of your mind. It's also a behavior-based approach. So instead of trying to look for someone that fits a certain predictive look, with their gender or their age or the way they're dressed. We want to focus on the behaviors that they're exhibiting prior to, wanting to conduct a harmful act. It's also based on relationships, relationships in the community, relationships with the individuals that come to your attention, and relationships with all the different surrounding support mechanisms that they have. So it's very rapport based, trying to build up kind of supports around who that person is in that moment so that they can find proactive, pro-social ways to express themselves and not think that, again, violence is the right way to solve whatever issue that they're dealing with. Okay, still no slides. I'm doing this all from memory because I can't see the screen back there. So the National Threat Assessment Center is actually congressionally mandated to be in this space. So you may be thinking, all right, what does Secret Service have to do with doing targeted violence prevention? Why are we talking about keeping schools safe? When you think of Secret Service, you think of agents, earpieces running next to the beast, trying to keep an eye on the crowd. But we also have a protective intelligence division that does behavioral threat assessment. So it is very much physical protection and behavioral protection in our mission. They're very intertwined. We talk about, incidents that happen and try to learn from them and bolster our preventative mission. So back in the 1990s, the very first research that the National Threat Assessment Center did was looking at assassins and those who attempted to conduct an assassination to see what we could learn from that. So if you think about what was going on at that time, we had the attack on President Reagan. There were a number of judges that were targeted, celebrities that were stalked and either shot or killed. So the environment was very much, trying to learn from these incidents and ways to prevent that from happening. Although there was not a profile, a way that they looked, a certain gender or certain age group, a certain demographic, even the education levels widely varied. But the behaviors that people exhibited are a law enforcement agency, and I think a lot of people end up having our toolbox against these targeted violent incidents. Congressionally mandated. There has to be some. Also are regardless of motive. So in some instances, in some different pockets of the government, people will just focus on terrorism or extremism. But for us, it doesn't matter what the motive is. Somebody could be motivated by fame. They could be motivated by grievance. They could be motivated by extremist ideology. But there has to be like some kind of motive there that's driving them toward this attack. So we've been around for about 25 years. We have a number of publications that we have available on our public website. And there will be, like I said, a QR code up at the end that you can go and read any of them. There are, in addition to the research that we do operational guidance. So from the very beginning, when we did this research, this groundbreaking research on assassins and those who attempted assassination, we learned that it's interesting, but it also has to be helpful. So you have to operationalize it and make it available to people. So we have some guidance that we released from the very beginning. We've continued to do that both for schools and for the federal government. We've looked at targeted violent incidents geared toward public officials and public figures. We've done this for K through 12 schools. We've done it for campus security, and we also do mass attacks in public spaces. So for those, we're looking at incidents where there are 3 or more who are injured or killed, and they have to occur in places where we're living our daily lives. That's the way that we kind of define our mass attacks. So not in someone's home. These are in public or semi-public spaces. One more. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Now I can see what I'm doing. So the mass attacks in public spaces, we were releasing those reports, again, 3 or more injured or killed in a place where we're living our daily lives and expect to feel safe. For us, we also don't just limit our research on gun violence. We look at any incident where someone purposefully selects a weapon and uses it to harm someone else. We also do, in addition to those compilation research analysis, we'll do a release of individual reports at times. So there's a report up there called Hot Yoga Tallahassee. And in that case, it was one individual who had many years of concerning behaviors. He alarmed not just people that were close to him, like his family members and his roommates, but complete strangers. He was a school teacher and parents were concerned, students were concerned. And but there was no one took steps to intervene with him. And he ended up conducting an attack at a hot yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida, unfortunately. The only other one that I want to point out up there is the very last publication. It's a toolkit for emboldening bystander reporting. So I'm not sure if you all have a way for bystanders to report concerning behaviors that they're observing. This toolkit was written for K through 12 schools, but with some slight modifications, you can apply some of the same theories and best practices in any environment, really, to try to get people to come forward with information when they see someone that's kind of going down the wrong path. Okay, so we're going to focus just a little bit, again, on our research. We use our research to operationalize and make recommendations for moving forward to focus on that prevention. So this is a 5-year analysis of mass attacks that occurred, and you'll see there that they're all over the US. So East Coast, West Coast, even in small towns, you'll see up there a very small town size, less than 1,000 people, all the way up to millions of people that were affected by these incidents of targeted violence. So there's no way to really predict where the next one's going to happen. And there's no way to say like this is the demographic of the type of town where these occur. It's anywhere. And you'll see the impact that these had as far as number of people that were killed. It was 173 incidents with 180 perpetrators. So there were a couple incidents where there was more than one attacker that joined together to enact their attack. So taking a little closer look at exactly where these incidents occurred, most of them were businesses. So these are places where we go to eat, to relax, maybe to get services done, like a plumber or a bank. But again, these are incidents of mass attacks that happen. The second most highest was open spaces. So think about parks or sidewalks. A lot of times these involve vehicle rammings, but just out in the open. In the education space, we have 13 attacks. 3 of them were at elementary schools. There were 7 at high schools, and then 3 were on college campuses. Residential community, I know I said that these were in public spaces, so in a place like that, that is a residential community. It didn't occur in the residence, like private area. These occurred in places where it's common area. And then we've got houses of worship at military installations, and then nonprofit. So affiliation with the site, in half of the attacks, there was no affiliation. So there was no previous history of that person having with that location. They may have selected it because they wanted it to be as many people as possible, and they had done some research on where that would occur. But in the other half, there was either a direct or an indirect affiliation. So it could have been someone who was an employee, a student, or a resident at that facility, or a former person. Now, the indirect were people that either had a family member or some kind of romantic partner, someone who was attached to that, and then they showed up and conducted a violent attack. So an example of this happened at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. We had an attacker who was going to that school, and he had withdrawn from classes. But he specifically decided to go back to this school to enact his violent attack because he was familiar with that campus and familiar with the classroom where he ended up going. For this attack, he, from beginning to end, these are very short in duration. A lot of times, by the time someone even recognizes that it is gunfire going off, there's already people harmed. In the classroom where this occurred, there were students in there who thought there were balloons popping, and they were in that same classroom, or firecrackers going off. It just takes the mind a few minutes to kind of understand what is happening. He opened fire at a table right by the door, and then there was one of the students in the class who jumped up and dove at him. That student was one of the people that ended up dying in this attack, but it did stop him from continuing on with his carnage. This attacker is somebody who was had experienced some stressors in the past. His mom died when he was 15 years old from cancer. He had graduated from high school, and then his dad, and he lived in Texas at the time his mom died, and they moved across the country to North Carolina as kind of a fresh start. He attended community college. It took him a number of years. He was attempting to get an associate's degree, and then he transferred to University of North Carolina to continue on with his education. He was feeling a lot of stress about financial burden that this was causing on him. He didn't have a job. He had a history of kind of living in isolation, not a lot of friends. The students in his class said that he had some angry outbursts in class, didn't really bond with people, wasn't really seen at parties or anything like that. And he was a little older than the other class mates. So he was in his 20s, and some of his the other students were, in the late teens at this time. So yeah, I mean, he picked this because he was affiliated with this school, and he was stressed about the financial burden that the school was placing on him. So. All right, so we're looking at planning. So these are observable behaviors that people can pay attention to when they're going through. I mentioned these are not spontaneous acts of targeted violence. These are acts where there's planning involved. And sometimes the planning involves days, weeks, months, years in advance. You'll see there that the planning can include who they're going to use as their target, the weapons that they're going to use, whether they are doing research on the ones that will kill the most people, or maybe it's weapons that they have access to in their environment, or going online to see how they could gain access to it. They do make to-do lists. You'll see up there on the screen, there's an actual mock-up of a to-do list that was on one of the attacker's phones. And some of the things are seemingly unrelated to the attack, like he was going to get air in his tires. He had mentioned on there specifically that he was going to be a little deceptive to his spouse and make sure that she didn't see what he was doing as far as loading up the car. He was even going to hide his dog tags. So after the incident, if he ended up perishing in that attack, that his son would have the dog tags as a reminder of who he was. A lot of times they will completely flush out their attack plan down to the detail if they're going to get away, if they're going to commit suicide, and how exactly that's going to happen. A lot of times it's related to suicide by cop. They will research prior attacks and learn from mistakes or learn what worked. Sometimes it's in as an emulation to these attackers. They want to do something just like them because they want to be just like them. They will, any kind of logistical concerns, how long it's going to take to get somewhere, what the response time is for the police. And as I kind of alluded to before, a quarter of them are not planning to survive this attack. So the suicidality and homicide is kind of intertwined in their plot. And so they do these final acts prior to, whether that is making sure their animals are taken care of or giving away possessions, or something else that's related to making a last will or having a goodbye video or statement written out, manifesto, something like that. So I also talked about the fact that we don't just focus on firearms, although firearms are the most common weapon that is used. And sometimes there are multiple weapons that are included in these attacks. You've got long guns and handguns. You've also got bladed weapons, vehicles, blunt objects. Sometimes people use their hands to strangle or punch, and then use another weapon in conjunction with that. There's explosives that are used. So really just not limiting yourself to thinking if someone doesn't have a gun or putting up that metal detector, although that's important to do, have those physical security elements in place, that isn't going to be 100% stop. This is just showing how much more damaging using a firearm is as far as the fatalities go. And then when we move on and talk about the attackers, I already said a couple of times, there's no profile for the type of person that conducts these attacks, but you can see there the age range, nearly all were male. But if you're thinking about someone that maybe is concerning you and it's a female, if you dismiss that person because they don't fit that profile that you have, you're missing an opportunity to support them and to intervene with them before they conduct an attack, because it does happen. The same thing with ages, thinking someone's too young to conduct an attack or too old. So I usually like to highlight that the youngest person in our report was 14. So he, in his attack, it involved him killing his father, stealing his truck, and then driving to his former elementary school. And he wasn't sure if he was going to go to his current middle school or former elementary school, but he decided the elementary school. He got out of the truck that he had just stolen and immediately opened fire. There were children on the playground. He ended up killing one, injuring one, and injuring a teacher in that attack. The oldest person was someone who had to use a walker to get over to a balcony area so that he could open fire on the target of his his vengeance, his grievance. And then he later committed suicide. I know it's kind of hard to see the titles at the top here, but this is all about the motive. And I mentioned earlier, for us, we include any type of motive for an attack. And even though it doesn't matter to be included in our analysis what the motive was, it's very important to understand what is driving someone to think that violence is the right path for them. That's going to solve all their problems. Grievances was the most common motive. So thinking about, prevention, how can addressing a grievance or having someone figure out a way to resolve that grievance when it first comes up is a way to prevent potentially an act of violence from happening. A lot of times people will get fixated on that grievance, and once they're dug in, it's really hard to pull them back. So again, thinking proactively and preventatively there. Sometimes it's multifaceted as far as motives go. They may have a grievance. They also don't want to, maybe they're depressed or have some kind of mental health issue and they just want to end their life. Or they want to become famous as well as solving a grievance in an extreme way. So it's not simple. And if you add up those numbers, you're not going to get to the number I mentioned earlier. So just want to warn you there. And then a fifth of them ended up saying that they didn't want to survive. So again, like if someone says that they are having suicidal thoughts, they may not just be thinking about themselves. They may want to go out in a blaze of glory, take down other people that they feel have harmed them along the way. So it's important to understand what is going on in their world and trying to figure out what this motive encompasses. So this is an example of an attacker that had a multifaceted motive. In his attack, he ended up killing and harming many people at his college campus. And there is some conflicting information. I guess I'll pause here and say when we do our mass attacks and public spaces reports, we pull from open source information. So we want to be able to share this with as many people as possible without having restrictions on law enforcement sensitive or official use only. So we just focus on that open source information. So there was some conflicting, whether he was currently an enrolled student or a former student, but he had been in that college is the point of that. I'll also kind of pause here and say all the information that I talk about is in our reports. So feel free to just kind of like sit back, you don't have to take notes. It's all available for you in those reports. We also ask that you not record the information just out of respect to the victims in these attacks. We feel it's important for you to understand the impact that these have, and these stories can be incredibly, emotional. So that's why we do it, because this is what drives us as we're going through these plans and trying to think of ways to prevent this, is so that we don't have victims on the screen. We also don't mention the names of the attackers because we don't want to give them any kind of recognition for these tragedies that they inflicted on others. So in this case, and I bring that up for a reason, in this case, this attacker went to his former college and he walked in, started shooting. He fired a number of rounds even before getting to the class, but it was the class that he was in. It was his former teacher or / current teacher. And it was a creative writing class. He reportedly had people stand up if they were Christian, and then he shot them in the head. If they were not Christian, he shot them in the legs. And from the time that he entered onto campus and he committed suicide was about 17 minutes. Now, that may not seem like a long time unless you're in that classroom with that person. That is going to feel like forever. He was very heartless in the way that he was, deciding where he was going to kill people or who he was going to kill, making people beg for their lives and then killing them anyway. His first victim was someone who was trying to block the door, and he opened fire on him. Reportedly, the person said, today's my son's 6th birthday, and he shot him 2 more times. He was motivated for a number of things. Religion was obviously part of the motive. He considered himself to be spiritual, not religious, and had some kind of grievance wrapped around that. Not a lot of information out there on this because he ended up killing himself in the end when police arrived. He also was motivated. I don't know if you all will remember this, but in Roanoke, Virginia in 2015, there was a reporter and her cameraman that were killed really on live TV. And that attacker ended up getting a lot of publicity, and that affected this person. He was very fixated on the fact that one person was able to become famous overnight for killing someone else. And he felt like his life was going off the rails. He was older. He didn't have a job. He had never had a relationship. And he wanted to at least have something on his side. And he figured this was a way to do it. So that all kind of ties into the motive behind his attack there. So other research we've done, I just wanted to highlight our K-12 initiatives because, when you're out in the community and you have people coming onto college campuses, they come from high school. So the threat assessment programs and processes that schools have, it's important for you to understand where they are and kind of pick up where some of these students may be left off in their behavioral threat assessment plans so that you can continue on with the progress that they may have made. The first publication there is an 8-step guide on creating threat assessment programs, and I will list the 8 steps in a little bit. The other publication there, the second one that was released in 2019 is called Protecting America's Schools. That looked at 41 incidents of targeted violence that occurred on K through 12 campuses between 2008 and 2017. And then we have the third publication, which is really kind of a good news in all this space. This is a report on 67 plots that were interrupted. So we had 67 incidents that we were able to do research on. And the plotters had someone in their circle come forward with information about them. The person received that information, actually did something to investigate, and they were able to be stopped. So these plots were interrupted before they were able to complete them and kill or harm someone else. Okay, moving on to our model. I just wanted to go a little bit over what threat assessment is and how we view threat assessment in our agency as far as, because I think sometimes people don't understand what that all involves. So it is an investigative approach. So if you recognize that somebody maybe has had a change in behavior, and I give a couple examples here sometimes. So I use my son a lot, who has graduated from college and has a job. So I know he turned out okay. But when he was a senior in high school, he decided he wanted to quit playing soccer. Now, my son, as soon as he could stand up, he had a ball on his foot and he would kick it around. So from age 2 until he was 18, every weekend was travel soccer, and it was constant. It was really like fabric of who he was. And I was shocked and concerned. Like, how could you give this up? So if you look at his situation, now if you have another person who quits the sport they're playing, you have to scratch the surface to see what else is going on there. So if you scratch the surface on my son, the reason he did it was he was a senior and he didn't get to enjoy the after school activities because he had practice every single day. So he just wanted one last chance to do that before he went off to college. He also got a job. And he couldn't do soccer practice and work because there just aren't enough hours in the day and do homework and all that. So he wanted to save up money so that he could go to school. He did not break up with a girlfriend. There was no change in our home. There wasn't a divorce or anything going on. His grades were pretty even. If you have someone else and you scratch the surface and you find out they did break up with their girlfriend, that their parents are going through a divorce and they're in this vicious cycle of not knowing where they're sleeping at night, getting shoved back and forth. Their grades are tanking off. They were going to get a scholarship and now that's gone. That raises a very different picture and is much more concerning. So the point of that is you investigate, you gather information about what's going on so you can put that behavior that you've observed in context. It is not to get someone in trouble. So you're not just gathering evidence so that you can either use discipline or an arrest as an option. And it's really just to find out what's going on so you know where to intervene there. The threshold for initiating these is very low. So as soon as you see that concerning behavior, that's when you're going to want to start gathering more information about what's going on there. It could be something blatant like a direct threat. It could be, I hate this place, or, I want to kill you, or making a gesture. Or it could be something less innocuous, like I said, with playing a soccer team. So these are the principles of threat assessment. It is a very systematic investigative approach, and we'll talk about in a minute what that usually involves. You want to get information from different sources. So not just talking to the student and their teacher, but also talk to friends, talk to their parents. Are they behaving in different situations? Do they have consistency over time with the behaviors that they're exhibiting? This all involves rapport building. If you can imagine, I know that you're in a college campus, so parents may not be, the first person that you're able to call, especially with the 18 years of age, and they're adults now. But with, a release form, and if you have good rapport with that student, like, hey, do you mind if I talk to your parents about this? They may be more likely to let you do that, when you point out that you're trying to help them. So there's ways that you can kind of build that rapport and get that information and build up those structures takes a lot of extra work. I'm not going to lie, but it's very rewarding in the end. The low level of concern, as soon as you see that behavior, the example I give for this is, and it's not mine, somebody brought this up and I thought it was very good. A woman explaining threats said, okay, how many of you have made a threat before? No one? Okay. Well, she said, like, I threatened my kids like 3 times this morning. So, threat is usually not the first thing you do. She said, we need to get out the door. So at first I was explaining to them, we have to leave now so that mommy's not late for work. That didn't work. So then she tried bribing them. If you get out the door, we'll have time to swing by the park on the way. That didn't work. And then, then it was like, if you don't get in the car now, then you're going to have punishment happen. So, when we encounter these students or others that are maybe hit that level of making a concerning statement or a threat, understand that there's a whole lot that led up to that point. So, trying to understand what happened before that actually kind of seeped out is important. Identifying early intervention points. So just being aware of all of that as you're going through. I know this is probably hard for you to see with the fine print, but so I'll kind of summarize it. Again, a behavior-based proactive approach is what we're doing here. It is about when you're gathering that information, you're not just gathering it to assess whether someone actually poses a risk of harm or not. You're gathering it so you understand where you can intervene. So if you find out that, that person quit the soccer team, maybe because mom and dad are divorcing and there's no money for them to pay for that fee or their uniform, and that's the only thing. Now that could be the tip of an iceberg where it starts a downhill spiral, or you could find a way to get that kid a uniform and have him continue on this very proactive way for him to be a part of a team. It is what threat assessment is not is, just a zero tolerance where as soon as somebody says, a certain word, they automatically get expelled. Now if they violate policy or there's a breaking of a law, of course you have to, have the consequence happen for that. But if it's not at that level, finding other ways to kind of help them out. And this doesn't replace any kind of physical security. I think I already covered that. With our agency, we do both, and we encourage people to do both. So this is our very elaborate and confusing model. It's 3 steps. I'm being sarcastic. It is to identify someone who's concerning, gather that information to assess if they pose a risk of harm to themselves or others, and then manage that risk. So make sure that you put some things in place so that the risk that they are going to harm gets reduced. So the way that people come to your attention, it could be self-identified. It could be with that very blatant outward statement, I'm gonna kill you. Or it could be their behavior, drawing on a piece of paper, a map of the school with dead bodies or something like that. It could also come from other people. So second party identification, someone on a bus or, at a function, hearing a statement that's made or observing them doing surveillance around a school or seeing them looking up weapons online or researching Columbine or getting really excited about an attack that just happened or that they learned about, wanting to share pictures of, beheaded bodies or something like that. Those second party identifications, there needs to be a way to make those reports, get that information into the hands of someone who can do something about it. So in this is an example of a reporting system that was developed at Northwestern University. Do you all have a reporting program that you use in your places? Okay. This just includes, you're not just looking for those threatening behaviors or the blatant things that will lead directly to an attack. You're looking for anything that's going to, any place in their life that you can provide assistance so that they can, just have a fruitful existence. So make sure you include those kind of things on your reporting mechanism, because a lot of times, if left unchecked, those could further develop into a harmful situation. So the second step is to assess. So how do you do that? Where do you go for that information? We encourage people to get information from the whole community. So various systems in place. In this model, the blue circles are more formal ways that you can get this information. A lot of times it involves records. They're usually quicker. So you enter a name in a database and you get information back. So if you're interested in triaging, that's probably the best way to do that. The yellow circles are more social, informal records that you're going to have to develop that rapport to get people to be honest with you and trust you and know that you're there to help and not get them in trouble or get them kicked out of school. You can be creative with these things. I know like online, if people lock down their accounts, but if you develop rapport with a friend of theirs, they may be able to show you if they see something concerning on that, that post that they've been doing. Or even with the mental health, I mentioned a release form. You know, some people are interested in signing that release form so that you can talk to the mental health professional. Or sometimes it's a one-way street. So you share information with that mental health professional or with the law enforcement officer. They're not able to share anything back with you, but at least somebody has all the information moving forward. And you want to tie all that together so that you can develop a comprehensive approach. You're looking for consistency, you're looking for corroboration. Is this a one-off statement or one-off behavior, or is this, you know, the culmination of many smaller behaviors that is now escalating, or the duration in between is getting shorter. So all of those things are going to come into play, and you're going to pay attention to all that as you build out this system. I mentioned behaviors are where this approach is based. So in our research of mass attacks in public spaces in the 5 years that we looked at, these are the behaviors that emerged with the attackers. These are the most common. This isn't a checklist. This isn't counting up how many of these that the attacker or the person that's come to your attention had. This is ideas on where to gather information and topics that you want to cover as you're going through so that you have the right information when you're determining if they actually pose a risk of harm or not. So just looking at a couple of them, and this is a good example. It's not a predictive model, so we're talking about stressors. How many people have never had stress before? No one, right? So we all have stress. So you can't say that, okay, this person has stress, they're going to be a mass attacker. That's not how this works. This is finding out what the stressors are, how they deal with stress, understanding that when under stress, people may behave differently. So if you alleviate some of that stress, you're able to redirect their behavior. Example for that, myself, driving down the road, you know, if it's a sunny day and I have all the time in the world, I got my favorite song on, and then there's a car coming up the entrance ramp, I'm gonna pump my brakes. I'm gonna give them the sign. They're gonna get on the ramp. They're gonna wave. I'm gonna wave. Now, if it's a different situation and I'm under stress because I'm late, because it's raining, because you know the dog got sick and I had to clean that up in the morning. It's traffic on my radio. I spilled my coffee, and that car comes up the ramp. I'm gonna hit my gas and I'm gonna hit my horn, maybe make a gesture with my hand. You know, I'm not gonna let them on. Now I am the same person. My stress is causing me to behave differently. So that's just, an innocuous example of, how a person can behave differently when under stress, but definitely keeping that into consideration when you're thinking about these people that come to your attention. Same with mental health. A lot of people go through depression or anxiety. That doesn't mean that you're going to be a mass attacker, but it is how that mental health is affecting you. And if it's something more serious where it's delusional or you've got hallucinations that are affecting your behavior, that's more serious. Are you on medication? Are you compliant with medication? Those are all things you want to find out if you're gathering information about mental health. This is a case that happened at University of Texas in Austin, where there was a student, he was actually interested in pre-med. So doing really well in school, and then he had kind of a mental break. He was coming home from somewhere, I think it was a work situation, and he was getting on a ramp and he got into a car accident. He actually was arrested for DWI because the officer could tell there was something wrong there. He wasn't behaving normally. And it turns out it was really his mental health that was affected. So he was removed from campus. He went home. His parents were incredibly concerned with the way he was acting. His eyes were just darting all over the room. So they had him committed, and he was released. The hospital recommended that he not go back to that school environment because he was under a lot of pressure with his classes. They took him back anyway. He ended up in his attack, and this attack lasted like 3 minutes. He went into the campus, the courtyard area. It was lunchtime. He had a Bowie knife on him because he said that there were people on campus that had guns. He wasn't a fan of guns, so he had a knife. He pulled the knife out. He walked up to his first victim and just stabbed him right in the chest. No words, just very calm demeanor. He turned around from that person, walked over to a table and like slammed the knife into the table. And people thought he was like acting or being dramatic for some reason. Not again, like not understanding this was an attack happening. From there, he turned around. There was somebody walking in front of him. He stabbed him in the back of the neck. And then one more person in line for a food truck, he stabbed in the back. At that point, officers arrived. They demanded he drop the weapon, took 2 commands before he dropped it, and then he was just very calm for the rest of the time. In the morning leading up to this attack, he had been posting religious phrases on his Twitter. People could tell he was kind of disconnecting. He actually thought he was Jesus. So that delusional mental health issue had taken hold. And when he got to the police station, he said, I don't know why I'm here. He had no recollection that he had just stabbed people. He remembered hitting the table, but that was it. All right. Last step is to manage. So for the management, and this is kind of like where all the magic happens. And I wish I could tell you there was a checklist or, you know, if this happens, you do this and everything ends in a positive way, but it's not that simple. You want to create a situation that's less prone to violence, obviously. So we can do that by alleviating some of those stressors, finding out what's driving someone and trying to redirect them to a better way to achieve that same goal. And thinking not only just about that person in the moment that they are in at this time, but even looking down the road a little bit. Do we know that this person doesn't do well at test time and there are finals coming up and they're already like at their rope? So putting some things in place to help them, knowing that that's about to happen. So forward thinking just a little bit for the known things that they're about to experience can be helpful. This, I mentioned the community assistance approach when you're gathering information. This is also a community management approach. So it takes a village and everybody has a piece in this. I think people turn to law enforcement a lot of times as a leader because, you know, they just have a lot of experience and authority in communities, but we all have a piece of this puzzle. So any little thing you can do, understanding the community resources that are out there ahead of time. You know, I mentioned this as a proactive approach. You don't want to wait till someone is sitting in front of you with a major issue to start Googling who to call about it. So just doing some research ahead of time and knowing what the resources are, who you can call, developing that trust, because when the relationships come into play, you're not going to share information with people you don't know very well. So just kind of bolstering that collaboration constantly is important. Okay, this is the 8 steps to creating a threat assessment program. Again, we wrote this for K-12 schools right after the Parkland tragedy and at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. We just wanted to do something, provide something to schools to help them further along this behavioral threat assessment approach in schools. So it can be modified for any kind of environment. One of my past jobs was to create an insider threat program in our agency. And I was doing that right when this guide came out. So I modified that guide and used that when I was building my program for our agency by substituting, you know, obviously there's no guidance counselor, but we have HR, you know, and we have our employee assistance program that we can get information from and build relationships with. But finding out or putting a team together, having behaviors that you know you're going to gather more information if somebody comes to your attention there, knowing when you're going to involve law enforcement, having that reporting mechanism in place, knowing the behavioral themes that you're going to try to get information about, having management strategies set up so that you can, put that plan in place when someone needs assistance, doing training and just creating that positive climate. So people want to come forward. They don't think like if I say something about my roommate, they're going to get expelled. They're going to know it was me and I'm going to get in trouble. They're going to, I'm going to get retaliated against. We want to take that out of the equation and make sure that people know where to go with information and they know they're going to be respected, and they want to be anonymous. That's going to be respected as well. Okay, so I wanted to leave you all with some tools moving forward. If you want to contact us, again, we've got a lot of experience in this field. We are congressionally mandated to be here. You've got your domestic security strategist. That is your point of contact. So if you need anything from NTAC, please reach out to this person. It is their job to do outreach and facilitate access to NTAC's expertise and experience. We can offer training. So we can do a 4-hour version, up to a 4-hour version of this information for communities. I really just brushed the surface today. We do these by request. They have to be for public safety professionals. We do not do town halls or do anything for parents. The best way to do that is to have your reporting mechanism and train them on that, because that's going to be their eyes and ears. We can do this in person. We can do hybrid. We can do an hour, like I said, or we can do up to 4 hours. And we always try to make the cases that we talk about relevant to the audience that's in the room. So that's why I selected some of those university examples today. If you're also in a room and you're trying to create this threat assessment program and you're having trouble with leadership buy-in, which is really important, we can mention that several times throughout the presentation to kind of help you get maybe over that hurdle. So we can tailor it in that way as well. I wanted to put this up. So every month we are doing virtual threat assessment presentations. We take turns between school-based and the mass attacks. You see there's one coming up later this week. It's 2 hours. It's at no cost. You can hit that QR code and it will take you to the registration page. If there's somebody that you want to learn more about threat assessment from the comfort of their home with their fuzzy pants on, they can sit there and do that. It's, again, no cost. A minute there. Okay, so our consultation mission, I mentioned that we are congressionally mandated. We've got the research, which our research can also kind of enforce your policy or give you some teeth to your policy. Like, we're doing this because there's 25 years of research saying this is a good approach. As far as a policy goes, we can review policy you have in place and make recommendations or give you feedback at no cost. We have done this for many different types of organizations. We've done it for entire states as a best practice model in K-12 schools. We've done it for law enforcement agencies, government partners, even the private sector. We've done workplace violence programs and reviewed their policies and made recommendations. What this looks like is you will send what you have to your domestic security strategist. He will get a team of NTAC personnel together. We'll review that information and then meet on a Teams call for about an hour. And we'll go through our specific feedback. We'll send that document to you at the end and any other topics that came up during that discussion. From the time you send that policy to us to we meet on Teams is about 3 or 4 weeks. If you don't have any policy in place and you're interested in getting some examples, we do have some that we've been given authority to share. A lot of times it is not workplace violence because companies aren't willing to have us share that with other people, but we would at least be able to give you something so you're not staring at that blank piece of paper wondering where to start, and then you can tailor it from there. We also do consultations on complex threat assessment cases. So we do not go out and help with investigation. It's more of that consultation, overarching brainstorming session. You've got someone very concerning. You've tried something, it's not working. what do you do next? And we pull a team of NTAC people together for that. Typically with the case consultations, it is within a day or two. This is not imminent cases as well. So if you know someone has a weapon and they're heading to a school or a campus building, don't call your DSS, call 911 and have them get involved. This is just, you know that there's something that is not quite right and you don't know what to do. That's when we can help. And we've done this again for law enforcement, for schools. We've done it for the workplace violence programs. Okay, so this is your contact information. Mike Kapachinsky is your DSS. You can reach him at that email. The Secret Service website is up there. That's the QR code. All the publications that you briefly saw at the beginning, the 25 years are up there. And we also have our Newark field office. So we've got our assistant special agent in charge here. I mentioned both of those consultation missions. If we have a consultation with someone, we invite our field office. They are local, they are on the ground, they have a protective intelligence mission that they do. So they are very practiced in threat assessment and may have contacts or suggestions on things that they've done in the past at work. So we always like to include our field offices on those calls. Feel free to reach out if there's any need to contact them, whether that's for financial crime investigations or other things. So we're very lucky to have such a supportive field office connection here. Okay, that's it. That's all I have. Thank you very much, and I apologize for the glitch at the beginning.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Great presentation. A lot of offerings there. Okay, I hope they take advantage of it. All right, we're going to take like a 15-minute break now. So 10:35, come on back. And then if Jennifer and Jim, just make sure you got your flash drives set up, okay? All right, see you soon.
What happened? Is that Erica? No, that's not Erica. Is it Erica? That looks like her dress, but it doesn't look like her face. Oh, that is her. That's her. About it, what is it? Germs. Yeah, nice handwriting.
Just don't want the feedback, so we'll just have to turn that off.
Test 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Is it? There's a feed coming? Test 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2. You can see me on Zoom? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get it started up again, so if everybody could take their seats. And just as a point of reference, we're not doing any Q&A after each presentation. We're saving it at the end, and we're going to have at least an hour for open discussion on all the presentations. Also, there will be sandwiches and food coming in probably around 11:30, okay? Next up, we have a higher ed focused intelligence briefing from Jim Dennehy, who's the special agent in charge with the FBI Newark, and along with Jennifer Lynch from New Jersey OHS&P. So you guys, however you're doing it.
Good morning. I'm 52 and a half and my eyes don't see all that well all the way back there. So I might have to turn a little bit and try these. But Jim Dennehy, been the SAC over FBI Newark now for about almost coming up on 2 years. And of all the talks that I do, hate crimes and civil rights and bias incidents is by far the top topic that the private sector, academia, community outreach, community leadership kind of asks for, requests, and even demands. And as it relates to what's going on right now in the Middle East, this has been our top priority probably since October 7th, when the Hamas terrorism attack took place on Israel. I'll get into stats here. I'll get into a lot of different data. And I want to just compare, if you will, and contrast. When I talk about deaths and other incidents on October 7th, the FBI considers that a terrorist incident. Post October 7th and the eventual war that was declared in the Middle East is a wartime effort where deaths and attacks are not tracked by the FBI as being a terrorism matter. It's war. So I just want to differentiate. I'll talk about American lives lost and hostages that are all affiliated with October 7th and not what's happened since. But beyond that, we'll get started. Yep, definitely can't see that. So our consistent assessment since October 7th has been, especially as it relates to the state of New Jersey, and that's important, no immediate credible threat of violence that we see. On October 7th, I, along with all the other special agents in charge of the FBI, were in San Diego, California. Not a bad place to be in October. And we were on an annual conference, including all the leadership from the FBI, from the director on down. And then the October 7th attack happens. And actually, it was a good thing to be there together because we were able to get in person, on time, real-time briefs from the heads of counterterrorism and beyond as to what we saw and what was going on, which resulted in a discussion that I had with the governor of New Jersey, I think on October 8th, because obviously he wanted to get the word out to New Jerseyans as to what he saw and what he had been briefed on the current threat. In all, since September 11th, I'll use as a reference point as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs as we reference them, have called for acts of violence and for jihad and to try to use this propaganda moment to recruit individuals to attack. Knock on wood, New Jersey is never really directly impacted by those calls for action. And I'll get further into that here in a minute. Primary focus for us is the lone wolf. And that's the person in mom's basement online absorbing this social media propaganda that's used many times by FTOs and beyond. And I'll even get into the domestic side of it, who then rise up, are radicalized, and decide to attack. They normally choose soft targets: movie theaters, churches, synagogues, temples, parks, schools, as we see. And they normally have access to weapons. So that is our biggest concern. Hard to find them, hard to locate them, hard to monitor them, sometimes until it's too late. difficult to identify, investigate, and disrupt. So many of them, if they're radicalized by a foreign terrorist organization ideology, and when I say FTO, I'm talking Al-Qaeda's of the world, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, both organizations obviously in the news today. Both Hamas and Hezbollah were identified by the U.S. State Department as FTOs in 1997. The FBI does not get involved in identification of what an FTO is and what it's not. But we were just obviously required as an investigative agency to enforce the laws that would be related to foreign terrorist organization activity. So we worry about homegrown violent extremists who would be radicalized by that FTO ideology, as well as domestic violent extremists radicalized in more of a domestic type of group or ideology. Racially motivated violent extremists who are anti-white or anti-black, and then anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists. There are groups that are anti-abortion and other that would be more domestic related types of concerns and identifiers. They're a lot harder to track than homegrown violent extremists because we don't have the tools in the toolbox to monitor and investigate domestic violent extremists like we would homegrown or foreign radicalized violent extremists, because there's no legislation that allows us to charge domestic extremists from a terrorism standpoint. So we're limited by the First Amendment as to what we can and cannot do when it comes to investigating those individuals. And as an aside, 3 things are needed for us to open investigations on those individuals: either an act of or a call for violence, specific radicalized ideology, and the third then would be that they make threats of, violation of some form of federal law. So very difficult to have those 3 already in place before we can even investigate those individuals. So not like we're monitoring Joe Smith's social media accounts just because we think he's a domestic violent extremist. It takes a lot more probable cause than that to be able to monitor what he might be ingesting online. Where it leads to where we can get involved is hate crimes and bias incidents. We're responsible for monitoring and collecting all the data on biased incidents reporting throughout the country. And I'll get deep into the stats that have taken place since October 7th on all those bias incidents that have spiked, obviously, since that time. I talked about FTOs. I think I got into most of what I'm writing, what's written there. Of note is the possibility of an organized attack in the United States. We don't see that right now across anywhere in the United States, thankfully. Our U.S. military, however, is feeling that in Iraq and elsewhere. The Houthis are targeting them. Other ISIS-inspired organizations are targeting the U.S. military right now. We've had U.S. military deaths, obviously, which have to be investigated. And there's a plot that we, working with foreign authorities, uncovered in Europe that was a Hamas-backed plot targeting Jewish people, where you can see the arrests that took place in Germany, Denmark, Netherlands. That's what's significant about that is that Hamas normally only focuses on Gaza and northern Israel. And the fact that they're now expanding outside of those interests towards Europe is of great concern to us. You'll see, and I won't get into all the details, post October 7th, all those foreign terrorist organizations calling for attacks in the United States. Al-Qaeda came out first, I want to say. ISIS took their time and a few weeks later, but then eventually came out with a coordinated statement, if you will, followed by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. You'll see ISIS there again. Al-Qaeda in India, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, all had really anti-Israel targeting Jewish people and anti-US interests on their mind and looking for people to be inspired to rise up and target those individuals. Again, since October 7th and since these calls for action have taken place, we've seen little impact in the United States and even less impact specifically in the state of New Jersey. Again, I say that with a knock on wood type of concern, I'd say. Day one, the FBI's initial involvement had, and number one priority is the loss of American lives. 36 Americans died on October 7th, 5 wounded. There's still hostages that Hamas is holding that are US persons. Status of many of them is unknown. So our priority was working with the Israeli government, and we have with countries that we, as the US government, where we maintain diplomatic relations, many of those countries we have legal attaché offices that are manned by FBI agents and personnel in those countries. There's about 75 or so worldwide. One of them is in Tel Aviv. So we worked with our permanent personnel in Tel Aviv to engage with the US Embassy there, as well as the Israeli government, and to offer assistance from hostage rescue team to bomb techs to beyond. But I think the areas that we could assist the most would be with victim specialists who engage, CONUS-based engagement primarily, with those American families who have lost or have had injured loved ones as part of this terrorism act. So I think we're 100% with the engagement on all, we'll say 41 of those families that were impacted. And we'll see that engagement through until the end, whether that's some trial, the end of the war and beyond, to ensure that we're coordinating with those families based on their loss of life. The First Amendment, part of the Constitution that really drives everything when it comes to our involvement with hate crimes and biased incidents. Hate is not a crime. Hate is allowed by the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and hate is something that we as law enforcement will stand on the sidelines and witness every day without getting involved. As members of university campus security and beyond, you probably lived that regularly when protests take place and words are stated at Kane University and throughout New Jersey and throughout America, especially since October 7th. And we stand and we allow that freedom of speech to take place. It's where that then turns into either violent acts or specific threats of violence or vandalism or arson or beyond, that then that becomes a federal violation. In New Jersey, at the bottom, there's a New Jersey harassment law, where if it's extended harassment, an individual just doesn't quit, then that person can be charged with a state crime. On the federal side, a hate crime is just that. It's the element of hate combined with either the threat of a specific crime or the crime itself. It doesn't have to be just murder. It could be painting a swastika on the side of a temple or school, and that is a crime. And we can prosecute from a federal standpoint on that. We have engaged with PUPSA and campus university police and public safety administrators, especially in the months that and weeks that followed October 7th. I'll get into the stats on all of the protests that took place in New Jersey. And the best thing that could have happened is cold weather come in and winter break take place when it came to protests, because that, in addition to the war continuing, I'll say, that kind of died, protests died down. They're probably not done. I know there are local protests today and this weekend in Teaneck and in Englewood, specific to Jewish matters out of a synagogue in Teaneck that we're monitoring and concerned about.
No, I put my AirPods in.
The campuses
Yeah,
around
the class.
New Jersey are still seeing continued protests.
I'm on the
by
other
both
one now.
students in support of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim views and students in support of Israel. Rutgers had the most, 20 reported biased incidents, and we look at most of those bias incidents surround the protests and rallies that took place on the campuses at the time, followed by Princeton. Kane's not even listed. To what extent, I'm not tracking how many biased incidents have been tracked out of this university since October 7th took place. I'm sure there's a few. And of those incidents, overwhelmingly, the report comes in of some form of harassment, followed by what you see behind harassment. And then most of that is an incident that takes place in person. So the protest takes place, students are shouting or yelling at one another, then the incident takes place. Harassment because of religion, because of skin color, because of something else that gets reported. And thankfully, in most incidents, that's where it ends. And I can get into what the FBI has done other than track that. But that is allowed because, again, it's might be hateful speech, but it's legal. Thankfully, it hasn't really, in very few incidents, has kind of elevated beyond just that. And I don't say that to kind of downplay these reports, because we want to have everybody report these incidents nationwide. It allows us to follow trends. It allows us to work with state and local police to properly resource with law enforcement assets those areas that have the most incidents reported and beyond. So that's very helpful data for us to actually live by. And that's what we go by, tips.fbi.gov, as well as 1-800-CALL-FBI. I know OHS&P will talk about NJ SARS and a lot of the reports that come through the state, and we track that too. And what's good about our relationship with OHS&P is we have liaison officers that work within OHS&P, and OHS&P has liaison officers that work within the FBI New Jersey office. So it's good that we're tracking the same data. How's that for a plug? Not bad. Specifically then, big spike October 7th to December 1st. So that's maybe 7 weeks, the number of incidents reported. Big spike both for anti-Jewish as well as anti-Arab and Muslim. Since then, it's leveled. December, January, and February all have similar amounts of reports, but those numbers are much greater than the times before October 7th. So I want to say, on average, overall, the increase of reporting for anti-Arab and Muslim biased incidents overall since October 7th has probably been a 75% increase or so, whereas anti-Jewish is about a 55 to 60% increase over time. I caution, though, that despite the war ongoing and the spike in anti-Jewish and anti-Arab as anti-Muslim, top 3 in New Jersey is and has been for a while now overwhelmingly anti-African American, followed by anti-Jewish, followed by anti-gay male. After that, it tails off. And when we track these in general, there are 7 groups that are protected civil rights wise when it comes to biased incidents. Let me see if I got them off the top of my head. Sex, race, religion, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability. The percentage of increase between over the last 2 years, we'll say. So this tracks what's the highest percentage increase per group. So disability has the highest percentage, but you can imagine anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim would be right there too, just based on October 7th. The bigger problem is everybody has an increase. So these hate crimes, despite how much I talk about it or anybody else talks about it, it's a problem that's becoming worse and worse. And despite all of the efforts law enforcement wise with academia and communities, it's just happening more and more. I would caveat by saying the number of reports that we're tracking is what's telling us of the increase. And a part of that increase is due to the fact, I hope, that we're educating the public on how to report it, and they're becoming more informed. So the reports have increased because otherwise they wouldn't have reported it. That doesn't mean that the number of incidents are necessarily off the charts. So that's just a caveat. Many communities don't report it because they don't know how. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't think anyone's going to do anything about it. And then finally, they're worried about retaliation for reporting it. So those are the top 4 reasons why people wouldn't report these things. And then those reports through NJSARS come in, the FBI looks at it. We then track, okay, what are we going to do? And those things that we do any investigative activity on would turn into what we call guardian leads. So you can see of all the incidents that have been reported, we opened 22 total as guardians. And you see the reasons why they were opened. Threatening, voicemails, phone calls, financing FTOs I want to talk about for a second. So many people might decide they have family, friends, loved ones who are in the war zone right now in the Middle East and in Gaza that they want to help with financial aid for medical supplies, for water, for anything. And they would go and use a website to donate $100 or more. And we care about that because many of those organizations that take those funds are actually affiliated with the foreign terrorist organization itself. And we look at that as the contributor. It's their responsibility to know who they're contributing to. And the State Department offers on their website a listing of those cleared organizations for financial aid that we would say are safe to contribute to. USAID kind of runs that. So contributor beware, I'll say, because financing a foreign terrorist organization like Hamas is illegal. And it's something that the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey would look to prosecute more now than ever because of what's ongoing here in Israel, Gaza, and the rest of the world. So it's just something to keep in mind. 8 arrests nationally by the FBI that have come out of biased incidents reporting, none in New Jersey, thankfully. We've had some investigations, many involving juveniles. We were tracking a 12-year-old in a chat room who wants to blow up the world at the age of 12. So the age of individuals who are becoming radicalized has dropped from 29 to 22 on average in the last 3 years. So now we're dealing with 12-year-olds. And the time for individuals to become radicalized has been cut in half during that same amount of time. So younger kids radicalize faster, access to weapons that we can't necessarily monitor until it's too late. And that's the biggest concern we have. Looking back, again, in New Jersey especially, but kind of nationwide and somewhat worldwide, there's been very little response to foreign terrorist organization calls for attack. That's a good thing. Biased incidents mostly focused around rallies and universities. So engagement with schools, public service on campus and what have you is something that's required. And thankfully, for the most part, they've been First Amendment protected rallies and protests that haven't gotten too out of hand. Limited homegrown violent extremist and domestic violent extremist response. Again, none in New Jersey. And we're all familiar with early on after October 7th with the 6-year-old Palestinian boy who was knifed to death in Chicago. Despite all that, there is a ton of massive of online propaganda that we have to worry about, and you never know who takes to it and who won't. Sometimes it's until it's too late. looking forward, the difference between what's happened in Gaza today versus some of the conflicts between the Israelis and Hamas in previous years is during attacks that have taken place previously against Israel, Israel wanted to respond in kind and we'll say teach those Hamas fighters a lesson. This has been very clear from the government of Israel that they want to eradicate Hamas. And who knows how long that's going to take. But eradicate Hamas, wipe it off the face of the earth is a much different situation than responding in kind to a foreign terrorist attack. So this could last a very long time, and that's obviously concerning to us. We feel that the public interest here in the United States about what's happening in the Middle East will sustain until the end of this war. And you can see it's heated debate regularly between those who are pro or anti-Israel or Palestine. But we have a presidential election coming up. We have other matters that might be more newsworthy that take over the, let's say, tone of the United States. And we'll see how then that has any impact on people's emotions specific to what's happening in the Middle East. And the Israelis have discussed about, let's say, focusing attacks outside of northern Gaza as it relates to hitting Hamas elsewhere and their leadership, which is not located there in Gaza, as well as hitting back at Lebanese Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranians, all of whom are somewhat involved in this war, targeting not only Israeli interests, but obviously U.S. interests as well. And you never know what that means for U.S. civil disobedience should an attack by the Israelis hit outside of Gaza and how that might impact protest rallies and activities that take place here in the United States. I think this is the last one I have. Our job, identify, prevent, deter, prosecute counterterrorism and hate crimes. But there's so much more to that than just that. And a lot of it is the outreach. We don't know about it unless we hear about it. And sometimes that one tip that would give us enough to open up the investigation and start that monitoring, identification, deterrence is what we need. So we rely on the public for that. And then with that, I guess I'll turn it over to OHS&P. We support threat assessment teams. I know Secret Service talked about that earlier. So New Jersey, it has a pretty good, call it NJ-STAT, New Jersey State Threat Assessment Team that really is everything that you had talked about, from not just law enforcement. It's not just a law enforcement issue or problem, but parents, guidance counselors, school counselors, school resource officers, mental health providers, medical professionals, and beyond, combined in order to address the threat, especially as it relates to juveniles, because it's rare that the federal authorities are going to charge juveniles on federal statutes. But we call it off-ramping, to find those individuals who might be of threat, who might have threatening language, and see what we can do to address that with that individual well before an attack takes place. So that's where we're putting a lot of our efforts today. It's working, and there's a lot more we can do. But with that, thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to OHS&P.
Is this on? Okay, great. I'm going wireless mic because I'm trying to be different than everybody else. So thank you so much for your time today. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm an intelligence analyst with New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. I specifically focus on open source intelligence and social media exploitation. So today I will be giving you a very high level overview of our 2024 New Jersey threat assessment, specifically the social media section, and getting into a little bit of SARS data at the end related to higher education. Just for everyone's awareness, our 2024 threat assessment did come out early last week, so that's available on our website for everybody's viewing. So the first product that we did as far as social media is domestic and homegrown violence extremist use of social media. So we looked at domestic and homegrown violent extremists, domestic being those individuals that are focused on US-based ideologies. These could be your racially motivated extremists, your single issue, anti-government. And then homegrown violent extremists who are individuals who are inspired rather than directed by foreign terrorist organizations as covered by the FBI. So looking at a review, we looked within 2023 across the year and the different events that happened across the United States. We identified trends, including platform type, pre-operational online activity, and then ideological affiliation or group influence for each of the actors. So we had 27 domestic incidents for domestic extremists. Of these incidents, that includes attacks, plots, and threats, again, throughout the entire year. And in 13 of those incidents, there was a social media nexus. Additionally, for HVEs, we had 11 cases, and all 11 of those had a social media nexus, mainly in their pre-operational activity. So breaking down the platforms between domestic extremists and homegrown violent extremists, domestic extremists were focusing mainly on mainstream platforms. So that's your Facebook, your YouTube, your Instagram, your kind of everyday social media platforms. They were followed by alternative platforms, which are those that offer increased encryption and less content moderation than their mainstream counterparts. We see this with sites like Gab or Truth Social. This is an important note because mainstream platforms, the intelligence community has felt that there will be a shift toward alternative platforms in the coming years for domestic extremists specifically. And while there clearly is a use, we have 32% here, there is still a heavy reliance on mainstream platforms, which you're going to continue to see on college campuses. That's where individuals are operating online, and that's where they can come across like-minded individuals and people that they feel the same way and kind of promote their other accounts. Then we have HVEs. They're heavily focused on encrypted messaging platforms. We see this with mainly Telegram, and then followed by, again, mainstream platforms. So again, we keep seeing this heavy reliance on mainstream platforms. We do worry about this mainly because that's where a lot of people are operating, and that's where we are going to see people become radicalized if they're exposed to this kind of material for an extended period of time. So again, we have two charts here, domestic extremist use of social media, kind of breaking it down specifically. We have a reliance on these mainstream platforms for discussing ideology and posting threats, followed by viewing propaganda and posting an ideological material. Then looking at HVEs, we have a heavy focus on material support, which was also touched on by the FBI. This individual sending money, resources to those overseas or to their foreign terrorist organization that they identify with. So I have two case studies here. For our domestic extremists, we have a white racially motivated extremist, Sean Patilla. He used mainstream platforms, Instagram, Discord, Pinterest, to plan acts of violence. He was sharing neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic rhetoric online. He was researching an attack, planning an attack on a synagogue. He planned to live stream the attack and was using social media kind of throughout the whole planning process. The authorities eventually arrested him, went to his home, found a bunch of weapons, tactical gear, a plan in his phone for the specifics of his attack, and a Nazi flag. Looking at our homegrown violent extremists, we have Kamal Fateliev. He was actually a student at Penn State Abington during this incident. He was using an online encrypted chat platform, sharing over 200 bomb, firearms, and poison-making guides to kind of instigate an attack on behalf of ISIS. So he was using his social media platforms. He was posting ISIS imagery, such as the ISIS flag, which we have up there, kind of to show his affiliation with the group and inspire others to attack on behalf of the group. So in addition to looking at domestic and homegrown violent extremists and their use of social media, we also looked at social media leverage in the context of critical infrastructure attacks. So our office assesses that domestic extremists will use social media and encrypted messaging platforms to provide encouragement, obtain guidance for target selection, and recruit others before planning an attack against a critical infrastructure. So just of note, the education sector is assessed at a moderate threat for 2024 as far as sectors go. This is based on 5 years of data, as the rest of our threat assessment is as well. Specifically for the critical infrastructure, we looked at 3 years of data, 2020, 2023, and identified 56 incidents, which again is attacks, plots, and threats. And in 29 of these cases, we saw a social media nexus. Again, there's a graphic up here. I know it's a little bit small, but so our main usage for social media was target selection, followed by viewing propaganda and ideological material, which can be looking at something like those firearms or poison making guides and how to find vulnerabilities within critical infrastructure. Moving into our suspicious activity reporting system, the FBI gave us an amazing plug on that, which we're very appreciative of. So looking at our 2023 SARS year to date, based on those that impacted higher education, we have a graph here of what we saw. You could see that baseline, we're sitting around, 5, 7, some lower months in the summer. As you could see, we did have a spike in October, November with 16 and 13 incidents reported, respectively. This is a direct correlation to the Israel-Hamas attack that was on October 7th. And we have seen this start to taper down as far as suspicious activity reporting goes. So breaking those threats down a little bit further, we have how the method the threat was delivered. So as you can see, there's written, spoken, and physical threats, as well as the majority that were delivered via online means. So breaking down the online means, we have, as you can see, the top two are mainstream platforms. We have X, which is formerly Twitter, and then Instagram, which are your top two delivery methods for different threats, followed by Snapchat, Facebook, Reddit, and then Telegram, which again is an encrypted platform. This is kind of our infographic slide for SARS and see something, say something. We do encourage all of our partners to share information as it comes to them. That includes those that work at higher education facilities. We facilitate information sharing through this process, and it does help us work with other agencies to keep all of our data combined. This is just some of our information, and we are doing questions later. So here's my contact information, and that is all on my end. Thank you.
Jennifer, Jim, great presentations. We're going to take another break right now, and then when we come back, we're going to have some virtual presentations coming in. All right, so take about a 10-minute break. Okay, I think we could get started again. If everybody wants to just take their seats. All right. Today's panel's been incredibly thought-provoking. We heard from the NTAC with Katie Lord on threat assessment. Just heard that very informative intelligence briefing from Jim Dennehy and Jennifer Lynch. Now we will be hearing from some higher ed emergency management practitioners. We'll talk about what happens when the critical event happens. How are colleges and universities prepared to alert the communities? Here with us today, we have Joe Lisa from Rowan University, Dennis Mazzone from Teachers College at Columbia University, Anne Marie McLaughlin from NYU, and Dan Moss from Cornell. Dan will start us off with his presentation. Dan?
Good morning. Give me just a second. We'll get the presentation up here. And can you just confirm you've got that showing on your end? Mark, is that showing up on your end? My slideshow?
Yeah, it is there.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Going to talk with you today about emergency messaging. It's one of the most public activities that we as emergency management engages in. We all know that communications are often identified as a weakness in incident and exercise after action reports, and that the public is more than happy to provide feedback on our emergency messaging. So it's really important we do everything we can to get that right. My slides come from a larger presentation that we recently did at Binghamton University at an emergency management symposium. And that presentation includes case studies on Cornell and other higher education institution incidents that have happened that have helped us to develop and refine our emergency messaging strategies and procedures. Basically, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of best practices in the emergency management space, and hopefully they'll provide you with some thoughts for your own emergency messaging. The first off is clearly identifying your message source or branding it. I'm not sure how many realize that many message vendors are using the same SMS short codes for multiple clients. We end up using some of the names you see there: Cornell Alert, Cornell Tech Alert, Cornell Agritech Alert for several different campuses that we have, FCS Alert for our facilities related alerts. But we're using the Rave platform, which is used by many other institutions. Locally, we have Ithaca College sends out their own alerts. Tompkins County, the city of Ithaca, they all issue alerts using the same platform. And most recipients don't realize that they're all coming from the same company. So if you haven't clearly branded your messages, they're not going to know who it's coming from, and they're not going to believe what is the trusted source of this. We've seen this where the city of Ithaca has sent out alerts saying traffic lights out in the city, use caution, treat intersections as four-way stops, and you have no indication who that message is coming from or who it's intended for. The other piece is making sure that your messages communicate all the information that you need, communicating the location, whether it's a campus, whether it's a specific location on campus, what's the threat, and what are the actions that you want people to take. Here's an example of an alert we would use for severe weather on our campus. Cornell Alert, identifying it's an emergency alert from Cornell for our Ithaca campus. What is the threat? A severe storm is coming, and telling people what to do, take shelter immediately in a permanent building, and where to go for more information. And we'll talk about those elements a little bit further on. But the key to remember here is we are not out there just to be a public information source. We're really sending these messages for a purpose to try and protect our population, warn them of a hazard, and tell them what to do. But the public often sees it another way. They see us as just the 5 o'clock news, just sharing information about what's going on, whereas we're really trying to change behavior, make sure people are aware of the hazard, and take the appropriate action. These are the FEMA message content guidelines, primarily for wireless emergency alerts. This comes from the FEMA's When Minutes Matter Community of Practice webinar. I highly encourage you, if you have the opportunity to participate in one. It's really focused, as I said, on wireless emergency alerts, which fortunately for them are allowed to use more characters than the SMS text messages that we typically have to deal with. But it's a great webinar and source of information and resources if you're working to develop your protocols. And as I mentioned previously, these are the elements that FEMA recommends end up in an emergency alert. A trusted source, what's the hazard or issue, where is the location of it, what are the protective actions and the things you can do to keep yourself safe. We typically don't use expiration times in our messages. We rely on a follow-up message saying that the incident's been resolved, and any other information, thinking about what's the literacy level that you need to use in these messages. They recommend no more than a 6th-grade literacy level, so people can understand them, linking to trusted sources of information for validation, things like that. Not things we always have space for in a short SMS message. Another best practice is using templates and pre-scripted messages. These are some screenshots both from the RAVE mobile safety emergency alerting platform, showing we have a whole list of templates. I know you can't read them, but we have a list of templates that are available to our dispatchers. The way our system works, we have an on-campus public safety dispatch center that provides 24/7 911 answering point services, dispatching of our campus emergency resources, Cornell Police, Cornell EMS, our environment, health, and safety staff, and then they link in with the county 911 center for dispatching of community resources. But the dispatchers have the authority to send messages once they're authorized either
Dan?
by the, yes,
The slides are not advancing.
the slides are not advancing. What slide are you seeing?
First one.
The first one. Okay, hang on just a second. Ah, that would be the problem. So clearly you've missed all these slides. So as I was saying, I'll run through them real quickly. Clearly identifying your message source, since vendors use the same information. Communicating information about your location and all the threats. These are the message guidelines that I was talking about from FEMA. So the source, the hazard, location, protective actions, expiration time, and other. And now we should be caught up to the right slide. Are you seeing the best practices using templates slide? Yes, I see Dennis shaking his head, yes. So this is a screenshot of the Rave Mobile Safety screen that our dispatchers would see, and they have pre-scripted templates in there. So when the police officer in charge authorizes the sending of an emergency message, and one of the other speakers is going to talk a little more about the process for authorizing messages. But on our campus, the duty commander, the officer in charge of the police shift, has the authority to send that. Vice President for Public Safety, myself, the Director of Environment, Health, and Safety, all have the authority to send emergency messages when there's a life-threatening situation to members of our community. And the dispatcher can go in here, and for most of these templates, they don't have to change anything. An example here is an active threat message. And again, you probably can't read this, but if an active threat is reported and we feel the message needs to be sent, the dispatcher goes in, selects the template, confirms the message doesn't need to be changed, and most of these do not. And the recipients are already attached. They just click send. They confirm they want to send it to 62,000 recipients, and the message goes. And we have that set up, a first message and then a second message in this system for most of our hazards, our major hazards that might have a no notification emergency sending of the message. But then we've also developed templates and prescripted messages that can be used after that first and second message have been sent. So that we have, already talked about and discussed and figured out what's the hazard, what's the delivery modes we're going to send it, what's the short message that's going to go to SMS text message devices, what's the long message that's going to things like email, voice, campus signage, RSS feeds, things like that. And they're already scripted out in here. They don't have to be used verbatim, but it's already written out, can be quickly copied and pasted into the Rave tool and sent. All of these messages also point people back to an official source of information. In this case, our emergency management website, emergency.cornell.edu. We regularly point people here for preparedness information, emergency action guides, and we've tried to instill in people this is the place to go before, during, and after an emergency to get information. Emergency alerts automatically show up on this page on the right-hand column. And during a crisis, we will take over the center column and we'll post additional information that is, too long and too extensive to fit into an emergency alert. So we really guide people here on a regular basis. Our Vice President for Public Safety sends out weekly safety messages with preparedness information on a variety of topics. Many times we link people back to this site and encourage them to go here and learn more. Another factor in emergency messaging is thinking about the consistent timing you need for communicating additional information. It's great to send out that initial alert, but the public is always looking for more information. Your message timing, you have to consider how many messages you're sending and what's the system capacity. When we send 62,000 messages, about 45,000 of those messages are going out through SMS text messages, and it takes time for them to pass through the systems, the SMS aggregators to handle them, send them to the cell phone companies, the tower to deliver them. And we know that if we try to message faster than 15 to 20 minutes between messages, we will see messages arriving too quickly at some phones, too slow at other phones. We'll see messages arriving out of order. So people may see an all clear message before they actually see the hazard message and they get confused. If our timing for these messages is too slow, the public starts looking elsewhere, social media, messaging with friends, things like that for information, and starts creating their own narrative. So to make sure we can meet this in 10 to 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes is a pretty demanding schedule to send messages when you're in the middle of an incident. We've worked on pre-scripting a lot of this information so we have the phrases, the information we need. And when you're in the middle of that stressful situation, whether it's 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning, you've got something you can fall back on, relieve some of that stress, relieve some of the errors in how you create the message and what they say. And you can pick and choose what you want to put into the next message from this matrix that we have. We've developed multiple ways to say there's really nothing new, but still provide some direction and calming information to our audience so that they know that we're still dealing with the problem and we haven't forgotten about them and we're sharing information. You also have to make sure you don't forget to develop all clear messages so that you can message people when the incident's over and tell them it's safe to come out. This is something we actually don't have that we're working on now, that never mind, that was a mistake message. For those cases like what happened in Hawaii when they issued an emergency alert during a test, being able to quickly call that back and say, nope, we're sorry, we were testing the system, that was an error. You can disregard that emergency alert. Some of the other best practices, utilize a communication team. Okay, none of us can do this alone. During an incident, there's never enough people to deal with the incident. especially when it comes to messaging. So make sure you have the staff that you've developed. You've got more than 1 or 2 people who can work on messaging as the incident progresses. Develop a team to work on these pre-scripted messages and your messaging strategy. Our group is emergency management, our police department, our public safety communications center, and folks from our strategic communications group, may be called public affairs, university relations at your university, but it's got folks from new media, meaning social media, web communications, folks from their communications team, and we've all worked together to develop these messages and make sure the strategy is on point. Learn from others. As bad as it is when others have crises, we get online and we start looking at the messaging that they're putting out. We're looking at social media from the university, from the municipalities, from emergency services. We're comparing, is what the university saying the same as what the local police are saying, looking at university websites, and we're learning from what people have done well and what people have done not so well. If you want to take a look at thewarnroom.com, this is professor up at University of Albany, Jeanette Sutton. She is truthful and brutal. I'll put it that way. She dissects emergency alerts throughout the realm of the public sector and gives you her honest opinion of what's good and what's bad. And it's a good place to learn some tips and tricks and what you don't want to be doing and what you do want to be doing. So, and then finally, it all comes down to having a plan and practicing it. We have a matrix that talks about, what are the different kinds of threat messages we might send, emergency alerts, clarity, timely warnings, general awareness messages, closure messages about the university. What are the message building processes that we have, whether it's pre-scripted messages or messages that need to be created at the time of the incident, how we're going to send those messages out. So we've already thought about which ones go by social media, which ones don't, things like that. Which of these messages need to be evaluated and updated, and then which ones need closeout messages when it's done. So have that standard procedure, make sure you've developed your templates and put them in your messaging system. Make sure you've got those scripts for extended incidents so you're not making up so much information on the fly. We do monthly communication team meetings where we talk about not just how things are going with us, but looking at other universities, other communities and their messaging. We do quarterly team exercises where we dedicate an hour and a half, 2 hours to just coming up with scenarios and putting them in front of the messaging team and saying, what's your next message? They work on it for 10 minutes. Okay, what's the next message? Things like that. And then our dispatchers that are responsible for sending these messages, they have to demonstrate monthly that they are competent in the RAVE system, can send messages, are logged in regularly, things like that. And that's my presentation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Now we're going to get the panel discussion started. Dennis, how do things work at Teachers College as part of Columbia? You've heard how it works up at Cornell. How does it work at Teachers?
Yeah, so good morning. Dan obviously outlined what I would say are best practices, and we certainly try to follow those here at Teachers College. As Dan outlined, we have a mass communications tool that we use, RAVE. We branded ours as TC Alerts. But when it speaks to activation, I think this is an area for discussion. Here at TC, what we've done is we have assistant directors who manage and oversee all of our shifts 24/7. And we've allowed them to have the authority to decide, do they need to send a message for emergent or life-threatening situations. We think allowing this operational level of management to decide and send emergency alerts helps to ensure that the most timely notification goes out to the TC community. Obviously, when time permits, we engage our full public safety management team, which would include up to myself as AVP. In the decision-making process, we do tend to rely heavily on templates and prescripted messages, but just looking at, tailoring those messages, obviously reviewing it before it's sent. We recognize, though, that, due to emergent circumstances, they may not always have the luxury. And we don't have a robust 24/7 command center here. While we have a team on campus 24/7, this is why we've delegated, again, this authority to our assistant directors, given them empowered with that decision-making authority. We also have multiple director level staff team members trained and credentialed in how to use the TC Alert system. And I can say from not only being a TC, but at my prior institution, that this is somewhat in contrast to some practices that have been in place. I know when I arrived at TC, it was only the AVP for public safety with the approval of the vice president for finance and operations that had the decision-making ability and or the training to actually send a notification. And what I've come to learn in my time at higher ed is that this is not unique. That this practice is in place in many other colleges and universities. And while I certainly would appreciate the concern for requiring limited authority to activate a large mass communication tool, I believe you have to balance the equities, the importance of getting the message out, certainly in a life-threatening situation is what matters most. And one of the reasons why, again, we rely on those pre-scripted messages. And we also, realize that, it's the first message. We need to get the message out. We always have the time to go back, send the follow-up message with additional information or instructions, as Dan outlined, is essential in these situations. And then I can't stress enough a point that Dan hit on, that the language, right? Getting these pre-scripted messages and templates developed in coordination with our comms team, I thought was instrumental. And we even socialized much of it with our cabinet level staff. So there were no surprises, if you will. So.
Okay, thanks. Joe, Dennis just mentioned how things work at Teachers College at Columbia University in Manhattan, the ultimate urban setting. How do you handle alerting here in South Jersey down at Rowan?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what was just that, Dennis mentioned and Dan, is true for South Jersey. I think what I have found, at Rowan, so I've worked at several institutions, and I also like to kind of point out that my role is kind of unique. I kind of am involved in a little bit of everything, but majority of my time is really with the student life, student affairs side. So anyone in the audience, anyone online, really looking at how do we, what happens after that alert goes out, and are people on the same page? So I'm very proud that I think a lot of what Rowan has in place really does mirror what Dan talked about. A lot of over the last 5 years, I feel like I've seen it improve every year. And I think it's because we're kind of looking at those things that work and don't work. I think message clarity is key. So like Dan mentioned, not only that, but we need to make sure, and which I think we do, is that we make sure folks that are on campus know what that messaging means for them. So yes, we need it to be very concise. We want it to be clear, be direct, give, call to action. However, outside of that student population, we also know there's people that work on campus that are in some critical areas. So they need to know what that means to them when alert goes out. And I'm saying from alert, from that active threat to a weather delay, a closing, to a road closure, trying to figure if there's a gas leak on campus. So really being, I think, aware of that. And I think Rowan has been doing really well also with the training and giving information out. One thing that I know that we do that I think is that the clear direction goes out. And then that's followed up with information, whether that's on a website or through an email. So when appropriate, when available, not every incident's able to be done. It can't do it all for every incident, but that allows it to be a concise call to action, and then giving that extra information that people always want, or they're going to try seeking out somewhere else in another location. Because I think what I've heard from others outside of Rowan is it gets confusing. You try to put a, dissertation in a text message, and it just doesn't work because it's confusing. So I think, Rowan, there's always opportunities to learn. I think we have I'm not being paid to say this, we have a good progressive leadership at Rowan, and I think we work closely with each other. So it's not just emergency management. It's not just the shift police officers. It's our dean of students. It's our vice president for student affairs. It's our university relations team. So I think that's really been a benefit to Rowan and, the kind of that South Jersey area.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Anne Marie, NYU has a significant global presence. How does that complicate the alerting process?
Thanks for asking, and it's great to be here with my esteemed colleagues and friends. NYU's global presence does complicate alerting. Like some of the others, we also use Rave as well as AppArmor, and we use the technology to enable us to alert both locally and globally. NYU has 15 sites across the globe, including obviously in New York City, but also 2 portal campuses, one in Shanghai, and I happen to be at the other in Abu Dhabi right now. And it's ironic, we're doing a PIO drill tomorrow, practicing our alerting. The challenge isn't just the technology, making sure that we are alerting the folks that we want to alert. If there's an issue in Paris, for example, we need to make sure we are alerting to the Paris list, and Rave allows us to do that with templates. We upload data from our global sites and our traveler registry. The biggest challenge has to do with determining when the bad thing is happening. It's 9 o'clock at night here right now. Things happen, in the middle of the night. So emergency management at NYU is co-located with a global security operations center. We have intel analysts, folks with government experience, private sector experience, and we work very closely together. I co-presented this morning a functional drill for the IMT here in Abu Dhabi with the director of the Global Security Operations Center, Sean Hackett. So we partner a lot. We rely on tools to determine. We do not have a 24/7 GSOC. We do, however, have a communication center, and they are watch command for us for middle of the night incidents, middle of the night in New York City. And additionally, the portal campuses have their own campus safety departments that have the ability to alert. Local practices also come into play. In Shanghai, there are restrictions on text alerts, and we find ourselves relying on WeChat. Folks are on WeChat, that's what they're checking. There's a campus instance of it, so we use that in addition to Rave. So that's the additional dimension that NYU faces.
Hey, thanks, Emery. That's interesting perspective. Hey, Joe, an alert is issued for your campus. In your experience, what's been successful and what has been a challenge when it comes to the campus community reaction and response action to the alert?
Yeah, so kind of similar to what I said is, it's that there's a lot more involved in an emergency. We know that's the initial alert, and especially when it's an active threat. But there's so many people moving parts on a college campus, much like a municipality, we function like that. We have students that live on campus, we have food service, we have commuters, we have international students that this is all new to them. And sometimes there's that language barrier and messaging barrier. But I think what has been a challenge is making sure that the right people are essentially involved in the pre-planning. So I'm not saying we don't do that. I just think it's always options to bring in the right people at the right time to be kind of involved in those conversations. I've experienced at other institutions. So it's kind of like when we think about like the incident management system, incident command, that it's not always about titles. It's not always, it's about putting the right people in the roles, and that's their role for that incident. Sometimes on campuses, I've seen that because we need to fill a role in an emergency plan with someone from our purchasing procurement, they put the vice president for administration. And that person has no interest in this. They don't have, they may not be the best suited. So I always say that the best thing is the idea of having the right people involved early. I think it was mentioned in the earlier presentation about building relationships, trust, so that when something happens, everyone knows what their role is in the situation. I've been fortunate to be able to kind of combine my higher ed, emergency management. I do a lot with fire and EMS, trying to, I merge it all together because I have an interest. And there's other people out there on campuses that have that interest, whether it's in the faculty, staff, whether it's just important to remember. And, I always reinforce that, just because an alert goes out, just because there's an incident that might be a public safety, immediate threat incident, that doesn't mean there's not a million other things happening at that same time. So really making sure key people are brought in early. Yeah, I think that's, and I find that that's really the best way to deal with it is, in addition to what Dan mentioned, the best practices, how do we pre-plan? How do we bring people into the conversation earlier and not when the alert goes out? It's all about training and preparedness.
Mark, if I could add to that, we've had to train our executives that emergency alerts are not university statements, and that emergency alerts are an operational function that really needs to be managed by our incident management team, by the responders, and we've gotten to the point where they understand they shouldn't be in the middle of developing those, that we've already scripted them, we have a plan for them. They should be working on the bigger university statements about the incident and not the emergency alert messages.
Okay. Hey, Dan, you had mentioned the message timing, and how critical that is. I don't know if everyone's aware of how critical the timing is. Can you explain or clarify that a little more?
Sure. I think you can look at some of the incidents that have happened across this country. And if you look at universities, communities that have had an incident, they issue a message, and then there's radio silence from them for the next hour. And you look at what's happening on social media, the information that's being exchanged, the rumors that are getting out of control. That just is a huge example of where you need to consistently send those messages. But as I said, you have to understand the limits of your system. You may want to send a message every 5 minutes, 10 minutes to your community, but if the message transmission routes can't handle that, you're going to create more problems for yourself than you're going to solve. So really that timing is something, it's got to be based on, what you feel the need is to share information, but also understanding what are the limits of those transmission routes. We know that email messages pass through our system quickly, but we also know that students don't reliably read email. We encourage our community to use the Rave Mobile Guardian app because messages pass through that much quicker than they do through the SMS system. It's almost instantaneous that they receive those, and we can send longer messages. But it's a question of getting people to adopt that and put that on their devices.
Okay. Joe, not that we're going to keep picking on you, but you also serve as the chair for the Campus Safety and Violence Prevention for NASPA. What have you heard from others regarding alerting and mass notifications?
Okay, so so I'm fortunate to chair a group. So for those of you who work in higher ed, in the student affairs side, even in the public safety, NASPA is a higher ed association. It's about 20,000 members total, and it's about 2,000 institutions. So it's a primarily student affairs, student life. So your housing, your wellness, advising, those areas. But there's a population of campus safety kind of professionals, but also those adjacent roles. So student conduct, wellness, Title IX. So I oversee this group, a subgroup of those individuals. So I actually spoke to them in our last call, and I kind of gave them that prompt. You know, what's going well, what's not. So these are just a few things they said. So I think it's important to know that, you know, it's not always great. So otherwise we probably wouldn't be doing this presentation. So they mentioned frequency. So they advised that several members work in very dense urban areas, that alerts go out for everything. So, you know, many might just say avoid the area due to a police presence, but that's every day, multiple times a day, because it's a city, you know. So if, you know, once again, the more frequent you see the alerts, people tend to then maybe ignore them. Another is confusion. They met overwhelming majority said there's lack of clarity or too much in a very minimal character count. Timeliness, several members. So like I said, these are individuals that some are in the public safety chief of police roles, and then some are working in our, you know, wellness center or in conduct. So it's the people that are, you know, I think if you poll your campus, everyone has opinions, but they feel also timeliness. There's sometimes either a significant delay, their perception, that could be a perception or it could be true, you know, when someone is notified about an incident. Some, you know, they said some go out instantly while others are delayed. So they said some of that has to do, they believe, and this is through those in emergency management, you know, they've had issues with network carriers and other things, and they can't seem to narrow it down. So, you know, you think it's one network carrier, you think it's one location on campus, and it's not. Distribution has also been a challenge, and I know depending on platforms that you're utilizing, there's options. However, one institution utilizes that they go out to all credit-bearing students. However, there's non-credit and other individuals on campus. So their system of who gets alerted and how isn't consistent. They've also dealt with silenced cell phones. So in this day and age, a lot of students are, a lot of us, I think, we silence our cell phones. So we may have a vibrate alert or something like that. And a lot of the typical, you know, SMS type text messaging don't actually kind of account for that. So you'll still get your vibration. You might not get the alert for several minutes when you look at your phone. I know, you know, some said that, you know, there are systems that out there or mechanisms that you can almost have like a, you know, a critical alert that would still sound, but that's not all the types of systems out there. And then really the idea of different campus sites. So it's kind of the idea of not unique to the messaging isn't always targeted for the location where the student is. So one campus has 4 campus sites in 4 different cities, you know, within the, say, the state, and things are different based on where they're at. So, you know, there are always options, you know, there's ways to do things by zip codes and different things, but that's what they've said, that there's really just been a variety of concerns. And I think some of them, depending on who you're asking, if it is the chief of police or the head of emergency management, you know, their perception could be different from someone who is a faculty member, you know, and may not understand, you know, what's going on. But at the same time, that perception is still important, you know, that we address that. So.
All right, thanks, Joe. That concludes the presentation phase. And now we're going to open it up to an open discussion, which can be on all the presentations that were given today. And, you know, this is where we'd like to really welcome in the virtual attendees and have them get involved. All right. I'm going to start it off. Robert, what do you see as the main concern from the various schools? If you had to pick one, that was the hot button.
I would say consistently one of the themes that we hear through our CUPSA groups when we have our meetings and discussions is the mental health aspect. because that leads into what we heard from the Secret Service this morning with the behavioral threat assessment teams, and just how important it is to have colleges and universities that have a vibrant behavioral threat team because of the mental health aspects, and not only for the dangers that it can potentially cause, but just for the students themselves that are in need of assistance in some manner.
Okay. Who else has a question? Come on, don't be shy. How about from the virtual side? Somebody has to have a question for somebody. All right. Does anyone on the panel have any statements, questions? Yep.
Hi, is this working? Okay. Sean Card, FEMA Region 2. I just have a quick question from the speakers that we had, or anyone here. Are any universities leveraging the iPause system, or are you just going through your contracted emergency notification system such as Rave?
I'll speak for Stevens. We have the Rave Alert system, and consistent with the other speakers. I mean, that's pretty much how we manage our alert notifications, through our emergency management team. We have the canned messages and the bigger messages that, if more context needs to go out, it would be through that discussion with the emergency management team. But yeah, so it's Rave, through the Rave Alert platform for us.
Okay. Yeah, I only mentioned iPause because FEMA maintains the collaborative operating groups. So the COGS under the integrated public alert warning system. And that basically allows for geographic targeting of a variety of communication means. So where a commercial emergency notification system solution is an opt-in system, iPause is more like what you would get in the case of like one of those presidential alerts or a storm, or I know like National Weather Service leverages it a lot. So yeah, and I think the COGS are usually managed through the county level, county government. So it may be something that universities could have, conversation with their counties to say, is that a capability they have, and it may be something you could leverage as a non-opt-in system.
If I can add, the universities are recipients of the iPause alerts, right? So we find, we are mindful of the fact that our community members receive those messages, and it's great when those messages resonate with the messages issued. In our case, New York City OEM will put out something. The iPause alert goes out to everyone. And we know that our community members have been notified in that way, and that allows us to craft the university's specific message to address things such as, the disruption to particular events or, campus status.
Yeah, Cornell also does not use iPause, and our county actually uses Rave as an opt-in tool. I don't believe they use iPause either. And our county actually takes our emergency alerts, they take the Ithaca College emergency alerts, and they rebroadcast them out to the county system. We've not looked at it. We typically, when we're messaging, we want to focus it towards our on-campus population and send the messaging to them. A lot of it associated with the Clery Act requirements of emergency alerting.
Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Hines from Union College. And the question came up in one of our meetings and I had no idea how to answer it. For example, they said, what is a good time in which a message, or an excellent time, in which a message should be sent out, incident specific, of course. And I said, well, I know what a bad time is, but I wasn't exactly sure what a good time is. Does anyone have an idea of what, and even if they reference the site that was mentioned, the lady that studies these messages, what would be considered an excellent time in which to notify someone, incident specific, of course, with accurate information? Perhaps
Well,
please, Columbia, you would.
Somebody else want to go?
Are you referring to an upcoming incident where we may have advance notice of it as opposed to an immediate incident?
I think it's message delivery.
Active shooter, ongoing imminent threat.
Okay, for an active shooter or active threat to life, a storm that's about to hit, we send those as soon as we're aware of the situation. It may not be based on just a single report. It may be, it may be officers get on the scene and determine that there is actually a threat to life, or it may be there's multiple reports and the officer in charge can feel that there is actually a threat and we need to issue that warning. We had a recent incident where there was a report of someone walking on a sidewalk adjacent to campus that had a gun in their waistband, and there was law enforcement in the area. They couldn't locate this individual. There was no indication it was an actual threat to life. So it wasn't sent out as an immediate emergency alert. It was sent as a clary timely warning, just to notify the community that there was this potential for a threat. But if it's an actual threat to life that is approaching or is imminent, that we've confirmed that threat, we send that out immediately. Whereas something like, we typically don't send weather alerts to our campus. We encourage them to subscribe to National Weather Service, New York Alert, services like that to receive severe storm warnings and that kind of thing. But if we receive a tornado warning that's going to impact our campus, we will send that out immediately. Whereas a longer fuse type event where there's a severe winter storm that's approaching that might impact our campus, we will send out a message, not via emergency alert, but using the same system, but sent just to email, letting people know that, yes, we're aware of this storm, we're monitoring it, we're determining whether there's going to be any impacts to our campus. And if we do change the campus operating status, which could happen, anytime during the night leading up to the next day, it could happen during the day if the storm strikes at the wrong time, that we would reminding them, watch the forecast, make your travel plans appropriately, and watch for an emergency alert if we close the campus, cancel classes, something like that. So I think it's going to be hazard type specific, but if it's an immediate threat, we're going to send that as soon as we're confident that the threat exists.
And I think the key point there is when you confirm it, right? We had Washington Square Park Pride Parade 2 years ago. The park was full of people. Someone threw fireworks into the crowd, and there was a lot of confusion. Was it gunshots? Folks, we've got camera visibility. We're able to see, and we got a very quick confirmation from NYPD that it was not gunshots, that it was fireworks. It would have been terrible if we had sent out a shots fired alert for something that was very quickly confirmed to be fireworks. If you start counting upon, your confirmation of the threat, then you have, how many, is it a minute and a half to send a rave alert via template? 2 minutes, something like that. And then, of course, you track your system performance, and that's why you do tests. We test every semester to just check the delivery rate. And as somebody pointed out, sometimes carriers might be quirky or there might be some issue, and you want to be able to track the data just to make sure that there aren't any issues on your end with the data quality.
And I'll follow up with another example that we just experienced in the last couple weeks. And sometimes you have to explain to the community why you chose not to send an alert. We received what was determined to be a non-credible threat. And in rapid consultation with other universities, other Ivy universities, we determined that this same identical threat had been sent to multiple universities, threatening bomb threat, violence, things like that. And we were able to determine that no actual threat existed, that it was, just a bomb threat, swatting type incident. And we sent a message to the campus notifying them that we'd received this, that there was no actual hazard. But then we were getting questions about why didn't you issue an emergency alert for this? And there's been a couple different communications out to the community, one through that weekly newsletter that I spoke about from our vice president that actually talked about when we send those alerts, why we didn't send an alert for that incident, and explaining it to them and encouraging people to sign up for emergency alerts through our website.
Okay. Hey, Michael Rollo, going to put you on the spot here. Michael is in a unique situation. He's a grad student doing an internship with the New Jersey State Police. Michael, what's your take on this? You have any comment?
Hey, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So something that we're interested in studying is how operational organizations like the NJSP and the Office of Emergency Management could potentially be leverage partnerships with higher education and academic organizations. So, from the perspective of starting out, if anybody has suggestions on best practices for an operational organization to reach out to their local higher education community and begin to establish those relationships.
So I can share a little bit. I'm originally from Boston. You can probably hear that. When I was at UMass Boston, we worked very closely with the state police. They came in to help us with critical infrastructure security assessments. They were a great link for questions. Dan mentioned the spurious swatting message that they received and that we all have received at one time or another. Whenever we do exercises, it's always great. State police and law enforcement have excellent training and experience in things like emergency exercises. Typically, we have to sort of shift it a little bit for the higher ed environment, but it's always great to have that expertise. And it's a good way to connect with the community to help everyone understand, the different contexts, right? So always happy to chat about that kind of thing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anybody else? All right. That being said, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to thank all the presenters. Great jobs by everybody. I appreciate it. And Jerome, would you like to give some closing remarks?
Again, thank you all for coming. I think it was an invaluable conversation in regards to critical challenges that we face in higher education. I want to thank New Jersey CUPSA. Chief, your participation in the event is much appreciated. It showcases the network and exchange of information that we have with colleges and universities throughout the state of New Jersey. As a former member of the New Jersey State Police, I'm always humbled at the presence of the federal law enforcement enterprise. Without them, our challenges would be immense at the state, county, and local level. They've taught, quite frankly, the ability to share information and to operationalize the information that's shared. It provides an incredible service in support of communities that we bear responsibility for, both in New York and New Jersey. So I thank you for that. A couple of highlights I took a look at. With the conversation with federal law enforcement, information sharing and collaboration, it's critical. In New Jersey, we have a fusion center. And the fusion center bears that responsibility, but we collectively bear that responsibility to make sure that we are aware and we share information whenever possible. And it lends itself to the value of partnerships and relationships. Those invaluable partnerships and relationships intertwine the higher education community in a much better way. I'm concerned about conversations relative to mental health and how that impacts our communities, specific to college campuses throughout our states. Behavioral intervention teams are critical. We have to make sure that we're actively engaged in assessments that are being conducted at our institutions so we can operationalize support throughout the entire community. They talked about soft targets. College campuses are soft targets. And it's abundantly clear to all of us that we have to be prepared for the eventual emergency that may take place in close proximity or on our campuses, because it's not if, it's when. The influences of social media, with the conversation that we had with the NJOHS S&P is critical. The ability to influence through social media and operationalizing poor judgment and acting as an extremist, again, in our communities is something that we have to pay attention to. The higher education conversations about emergency messaging and alternate messaging is critically important. Providing information in real time to stakeholders in our communities is imperative. Otherwise, we lose the influences that we gain by acting as a member of a community of interest that represents whole of community. Cornell, Rowan, Columbia, and NYU talked about organizational connectivity and planning. And they addressed public safety management teams. But I think more so, I think the platform that was created by FEMA many years ago, representing the whole of community interests, is something that we have to absolutely pay attention to. If you are a member of a community, you bear the responsibility to insulate and protect the community. And I think the FBI, the SAC from the Newark office said it best. We don't know about it unless we hear about it. So it's going to be critical for us to become a part of that network to make sure that safety and security is front and foremost in our conversations that serve and protect our institutions. Thank you for participating in the event. And I look forward to future conversations relative to campus safety with the federal government, as well as with our higher education stakeholders. Thank you.
Event. We have food here for lunch, and thanks for everybody for being here, and thanks for all your contributions. Thanks.